The WNBA finally got everything it wanted, and Caitlin Clark exposed the biggest problem no one expected. Ratings exploded. Arenas sold out. Millions of new fans arrived. Sponsors rushed in. Suddenly, the WNBA was getting the kind of attention it had spent decades chasing. But instead of celebrating, the league found itself facing a completely different challenge. Because when Caitlin Clark changed women's basketball, she didn't just bring more fans. She exposed every crack that had been hiding beneath the surface. Questions about officiating, questions about player safety, questions about media coverage, questions about how the league handled its biggest star. This is no longer just the story of Caitlin Clark. It's the story of what happens when a sports league finally reaches the spotlight, before it's fully prepared for everything that comes with it. And once you see how all of these pieces fit together, you'll understand why so many fans believe the WNBA is facing the biggest turning point in its history. The college explosion that changed everything. Before Caitlin Clark ever played a WNBA game, she had already become something larger than college basketball. She was not just a star, she was an event. Her Iowa games shattered viewing records. Millions of new fans who had never watched women's basketball suddenly tuned in just to watch her play. By the time she entered the WNBA, she wasn't simply the #1 draft pick. She had become one of the biggest attractions in all of sports. The impact was immediate. Television ratings jumped, jerseys sold out, teams moved Indiana Fever games into larger arenas, ticket prices soared. National media that had largely ignored the league suddenly couldn't stop talking about it. This wasn't gradual growth, it was a transformation almost overnight. Her debut drew massive viewership. Her jersey sold at a rate that instantly stood out. Teams moved games into bigger arenas when Indiana came to town. Road attendance surged. National media began paying attention in a totally different way. This was not gradual growth, this was a jolt, a shock to the system. And for the WNBA, that was both an opportunity and a test. The league got what it always wanted. For years, the WNBA had been asking for more coverage, more respect, more investment, more fans, more visibility. Then Clark showed up and accelerated all of it. That is what makes this story so fascinating, because in theory, this should have been simple. A league that had spent decades fighting for a larger audience finally got one. Sponsors had more reason to care. Broadcasters had bigger numbers to point to. Teams had more ticket demand. Players had a clearer business case for bigger paydays and better treatment. In a purely business sense, this should have felt like a breakthrough, and in many ways, it was. But breakthroughs also create pressure. They force leagues to reveal whether they are structurally ready for the future they claim to want. That is where the WNBA started looking much less comfortable. Because once Clark arrived, every weak point inside the league became harder to hide. Travel standards became a bigger conversation. Officiating became a bigger conversation. Player safety became a bigger conversation. Internal resentment became a bigger conversation. Media narratives became a bigger conversation. The spotlight did not just make Clark bigger, it made every crack in the league more visible. Why Caitlin Clark became a stress test. Caitlin Clark did not just become the face of a new audience, she became a stress test for the league office, a stress test for officials, a stress test for veterans, a stress test for media, a stress test for the WNBA's own identity. Because once she became the center of this much attention, every decision involving her started carrying extra weight. If she got hit hard, it became a headline. If she got a technical, it became a debate. If she was left out of something, it became a controversy. If she played badly, people overreacted. If she played well, people overreacted. Nothing around her stayed small. That is what happens when a player becomes bigger than the system around her is used to handling, and that is where some of the discomfort began. Because the WNBA had always sold itself partly on the idea of collective identity. A league full of stars, a league about the group, not just the individual, a league where history mattered, where veterans mattered, where no one player was supposed to tower over the whole thing in the way Michael Jordan did over the NBA. Then Clark arrived, and market forces stopped caring about that philosophy. Fans were showing up for her. Networks were measuring her effect. Sponsors were responding to her audience. Road teams were pricing tickets based on her presence. The market made its decision before the league had fully figured out how to emotionally or institutionally adjust to it. The league's biggest challenge was never just basketball. That is why this story is bigger than a roster decision, a foul call, or a bad press conference. The WNBA's biggest challenge in the Clark era was never just basketball, it was adaptation. But here's what almost nobody's talking about. The biggest problem wasn't Caitlin Clark herself. It was what her success exposed inside the WNBA. Because once millions of new fans arrived, every weakness inside the league suddenly became impossible to hide. And that is where the story takes a completely different turn. How do you preserve your history without sounding resentful of your future? How do you celebrate veterans without pretending the market is not changing? How do you keep your culture intact while also embracing an audience that is far broader and messier than the one you had before? Those are not simple questions, and to be fair, most leagues struggle when a truly transformative star arrives. The NBA had to adjust to Magic and Bird, then to Jordan, then to LeBron. Major sports leagues always talk about honoring the whole game, but when one player suddenly bends the economics of the entire sport, neutrality becomes harder to maintain. That is where the WNBA found itself. Clark was not just another player entering the system. She was forcing the system to reveal what it really was. Flexible, protective, ready, resentful, unprepared. Different people saw different answers, but almost everybody could feel the tension. Why fans started asking harder questions. The more attention Clark brought, the more fans started noticing things they might have ignored before. Why did certain controversial moments seem to spiral so quickly? Why did some reactions from players or media sound more irritated than celebratory? Why did ordinary league issues suddenly feel supercharged whenever Clark was involved? Some of that was simply because more people were watching. That matters. A thing does not need to happen more often to feel bigger. Sometimes it just needs a larger audience, but some of it also reflected a real adjustment problem. The league had spent years trying to build legitimacy with one kind of fan and one kind of media attention. Now it had a much larger audience with very different expectations. That new audience wanted stars, wanted drama, wanted excellence, wanted consistency, wanted accountability, wanted spectacle, and above all, it wanted the league to act like it understood the scale of the opportunity in front of it. That is where frustration started creeping in, because a lot of fans began feeling like the WNBA enjoyed the benefits of Clark's popularity, while also resisting what that popularity was clearly demanding: more professionalism, better presentation, sharper officiating, stronger messaging, a clearer willingness to protect and promote the player driving the moment. Whether that criticism was always fair is one thing, but the feeling itself was real, and once that feeling takes hold, every new controversy gets interpreted through it. The internal tension was always going to surface. There is another layer to this that matters. Veteran players had spent years carrying this league through much quieter times. They fought for respect, they fought for money, they fought for visibility, they fought for better conditions. Then suddenly, a rookie enters the league and becomes the focal point of national attention almost instantly. Even if you understand the business logic of that, the emotional side of it is complicated. That does not automatically mean jealousy. It does not mean anyone's legacy is invalid. It does not mean veterans were wrong to feel protective of what they helped build, but it does mean the league had to manage a transition that was always going to be sensitive, and too often it looked like the league was reacting to that transition instead of guiding it. That is the difference. A strong league helps its old guard feel honored while also making clear that the future is here. A shaky league lets the tension sit there and leak into every conversation until fans start sensing it everywhere. That is what happened. Clark became the center of not just attention, but unresolved feelings about status, recognition, fairness, and power. And because she was the most visible person in the room, everything kept landing on her. The business side moved faster than the culture side. This may be the single clearest way to understand the entire situation. The business side of the WNBA moved faster than the culture side. The money responded quickly. The audience responded quickly. The sponsorship world responded quickly. The media world responded quickly. But culture is slower. Identity is slower. People inside institutions do not change as quickly as the spreadsheets do. So what you got was a league that had already entered a new economic reality without fully entering a new emotional reality. That gap created friction. And it still does, because now the WNBA has to live inside a version of itself that is far bigger than the one many people inside it originally came up through. That means the stakes are different. It means one player's absence changes resale markets. It means one player's highlights change national coverage. It means one player can accelerate an entire labor and media conversation. That is what Clark's arrival did. It did not create every problem, but it magnified every unresolved one. Did the WNBA actually mishandle the moment? That is the biggest question. And the fairest answer is probably this: not always intentionally, but often visibly. That distinction matters. I do not think you need a grand conspiracy to explain what happened. You do not need secret sabotage or cartoon villain motives. Sometimes institutions simply fail in slower, messier ways. They hesitate, they overcorrect, they protect old norms too long. They send mixed messages, they struggle to match the scale of a new moment. That is often worse than sabotage because it is harder to solve. It means the problem is not one bad actor, it is the culture of the system itself. And that is why this story has lasted so long. If it were just one bad decision, people would move on. If it were just one controversial game, people would move on. But this has felt like a repeating pattern, a league standing in front of the biggest opportunity in its history and never fully sounding like it knows how to talk about it. What this means for the future. The good news for the WNBA is that this moment is still full of possibility. Clark's arrival did not just create tension, it created leverage. Leverage for players in labor talks, leverage for teams seeking sponsorships, leverage for the league in media negotiations, leverage for women's basketball more broadly. That matters. Because even if the transition has been awkward, the opportunity is still real. The WNBA can still turn this era into a long-term breakthrough, but to do that, it has to stop acting like it can preserve the old emotional order while living in a new commercial reality. It has to choose clarity, protect the stars better, message the moment better, respect the veterans without acting threatened by the future, embrace growth without pretending growth comes with no friction. That is the assignment. And it is not an easy one, but it is the only path forward because the audience is already here, the attention is already here, the money is already here. The question is whether the league can mature fast enough to match the moment. The real takeaway. So, was Caitlin Clark the golden ticket? In a lot of ways, yes. But the deeper story is not that the WNBA got lucky and then threw the chance away. It is that the WNBA got exactly the kind of transformative star it had spent decades hoping for, and then had to confront everything inside itself that star power would expose. That is why this story keeps lasting. It is not just about Clark, it is about the league she walked into, the league she changed, and the league that now has to decide what it wants to become. Because once the world starts paying attention, you do not get to go back to being a smaller version of yourself. You either grow into the moment or spend years looking like you were never really ready for it.